All the time.
Okay, good morning, everybody. As we go to the Parsha, this week's Parsha is Boy. Really, as a Torah, as we know, the Torah should have started with this week's Parsha. The Rashi, the first Rashi, says the Torah should have started with this week's Parsha, because this week's Parsha is given the commandments, the first commandments to the Jewish people as they were in Mitzrayim still. God gave in this week's Parsha 3 commandments. Commandment of Chodesh Shalachem, commandment of the sacrifice of the Passover, and the commandment of circumcision are mentioned in this week's Parsha. So this is really the beginning of the journey of Am Yisrael. Truth is that this Parsha is the Parsha with God. We say it every Yontif. We say Ata Bechartanu. This is the portion where God chose the Jewish nation as a nation to take them out of Mitzrayim, to ultimately give them the Torah. So this is an important Parsha to sing each and every one of us. So here is where God commands, because the commandment of Kiddush HaChodesh was given not over to every Jew, it was given to the Bezdin, the court. And Moshe Rabbeinu at that time was given the mitzvah of dedicating the dedication of the month of Nisan, the first month of the year, and how to do Kiddush Levana, sanctification of the moon. But here the Torah comes, text number 1a, page number 40. Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Withdraw and take yourself a sheep for your families and slaughter the sacrifice, the Passover sacrifice." Right? It was a mitzvah. First, the mitzvah, you shall take a bunch of hyssop and mercy, right? The blood of the basin, and you shall extend on the lintel your doorpost. Right? Reading the Parsha. And on the bloodshed, the blood of your basin, you shall not go out, any man in the entrance of this house, and you shall pass, and God will pass over Egypt, and he will see the blood on the lintel and the doorpost, and God will pass over the entrance, and will not permit the destroyer to enter the house to smite you, and you shall keep this matter and statute for you and your children forever. And it shall come to pass when you enter the land of Israel, and God will give you and spoke to you, you shall observe the service. It will come to pass, your children will say, what is the service? You will say, Passover, sacrifice to God. As he passed over the house of the children of Israel and Egypt, he smote and the Egyptians, and he saved at your house. The people kneeled and they prostrated themselves. Children of Israel did God's command. Why did God have to give them this command? Why in the world did God have to tell them to do anything? Right? It's a general question that's asked by all commentators, because we know that God promised Abraham to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. End of story. The promise he made to Abraham, that he was going to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. So either he had to fulfill the promise or not. Why did God have to ask them to do a mitzvah? And if God needed to ask them to do a mitzvah, why didn't he give them all the mitzvahs? Why in the world did God have to do this? The mitzvah of Korban Pesach, to do a Korban Pesach. Why? All the mitzvah circumcision. Why did God suddenly, why did God have to do this? It doesn't make any sense. Suddenly, I need you to do a mitzvah. Why? Why couldn't they go out of Mitzrayim? Because God had promised that he took them out of Mitzrayim and take them out of Mitzrayim. And then give the Torah. Finished. He's giving the Torah anyway. 50 days later, that wasn't the plan. And we know that God told Moses that wasn't the plan. So we all know the plan was to give the Torah. Not arguing at that point. The question that's asked over here, why in the world did we need to have these 2 commandments? What was the point of that?
Wanted to see the commitment.
So they give them all 613 commandments.
Give all the commandments in Egypt, because then it would be part of Egypt.
Why he didn't have any commandments? Rashi is bothered by this a little bit. And Rashi brings down our sage, the Masya ben Chorosh. Masya ben Chorosh, and you should know one of the Klali Rashi, one of the general rules of Rashi, when he brings down the sage's name, most Rashis you'll learn, it doesn't say mention the name of any of the people that says the statement. It says a statement. When Rashi says a name, he wants to bring something about with this name. He wants the name is important. The person over here is important in this commentary. If you're going to go look up and you'll find out who this rabbi is, you'll see why I mentioned his name and why is it important to this lesson. So Amasim Bechoresh said as follows. He said, God said, the time to fulfill the oath that I swore to Abraham that I would redeem his children has arrived. But the Jewish people have no commandments in their hands, which to occupy themselves in order to be redeemed. This is even more harder to understand. What do you mean? You just said they were being redeemed because of the oath. Okay, so Master Bechar says, no, they didn't have something to be redeemed. As the verse said, but you were naked and bare. We say this statement at the Seder. So he gave them two mitzvahs, the blood of Passover and the blood of circumcision. He told them, I want you to do two mitzvahs that are connected to blood, to circumcise yourself, and to all the males, not everybody, all the males that are above 8 days old, and to bring a carbon Pesach. They circumcised themselves on that night. It was a busy night. As the verse states, downtrodden with your blood, with two types of blood. That's the teaching of Rav Masya ben Choresh. This is his teaching. Rashi brings down this teaching. So the question is asked. So now the question is even better. My question I started off, why couldn't it be one mitzvah? Circumcise yourself, that would have been the mitzvah. Circumcise himself and finish. Right? You're looking for, why two? If you have two, why not three? Why not four? Why not 5? Why not 613? So if you want to say they needed a mitzvah, okay. So they had a mitzvah, circumcise themselves. That would make common sense. Here you're taking the Jews out of Mitzrayim, and then the Jewish nation is separate from the Egyptian, the circumcised, that was like the mitzvah. So why do we need two mitzvahs? Why does it need two commandments? Why those two? Okay, so circumcision, you could say Abrahamic. It's a mitzvah that God gave to Abraham. It's a mitzvah that every Jew that God says is a covenant between the Jewish people and God. So if I want to choose, I would choose that one because that was a covenant between the Jews and God, and that would be the mitzvah. And that's it. Why do you need two mitzvahs? And if the truth is, if God did a mitzvah, why you need to promise anymore? Right. What is the promise? So God says, I need the promise. I promised Abraham, and now I need a mitzvah. I need a commandment.
Maybe because the whole family was involved in the second one. You're putting family is involved. The circumcision is like a person.
I need the family.
It's a commitment.
God needs a commitment. Why do you need a commitment? If you need a commitment, then who needs to vow? God suddenly needed a commitment. I don't understand why God needs suddenly a commitment. Suddenly he needed a commitment. God needed a commitment. I mean, if the Jews were not committed, then God wouldn't take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. Oh, how can God do that? He made a vow to Abraham.
Yeah. Busy and engaged.
Keep him busy.
Keep him busy and engaged so they wouldn't think not to leave. Because once you begin a process, you're more likely to...
Okay, very good. Very good. I like that. I can go that way. So why dafka these two mitzvahs? The 630 commandments. So again, circumcision, I can understand. Why don't you keep him busy making tefillin? Keep him busy, keeping kosher. Keep him busy. I can find you a lot of mitzvahs that can keep Jews busy.
Time issues,
What?
time issues.
So concerning, look at the technical Rashi continues and says, concerning what you ask, what merit do the Israelites have to do that they should go out of Egypt? I have a great thing dependent on this Exodus for the right, because the truth is Moshe Rabbeinu had that question before. This is Rashi. When Moshe Rabbeinu was arguing with God, one of his questions was, why did Jewish people merit to go to Egypt? I mean, the Moshe Rabbeinu was not happy with the promise of Abraham. Because Abraham was promised 400 years ago. So God said, your children are going to go out of Egypt. Maybe these were not his children anymore. I don't know. Maybe this talk about 7 generations later. God could have said, you know what? I made a promise to Abraham. If this group looked like Abraham, this group doesn't look like Abraham that much, right? His great-great-grandchildren, not so much like him. So therefore, what I have to keep my promise. I made a promise to Abraham. Abraham's going to come tell me why you're not keeping the promise. I would say, look at the great-grandchildren. These are not exactly these don't look like your family. They look like a bunch of Egyptians. So what are you complaining, right? So therefore, right? The Eibishter, that's a Moshe Rabbeinu telling to God. God's asking Moshe Rabbeinu to take the Jews out of Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I don't know if these Jews deserve to go out of Egypt. Why did they deserve to go out of Egypt? What's so special about this group? They're the only slaves in Egypt. I'm sure Egypt had other slaves too. So why do you think? Why do you care about this group? So God says, no. You're right. I'm promising you that this group will get the Torah. They're going to receive the Torah 50 days after they go out of Egypt. Right? So that's what he says to them. God says to Moses, what merit do the Israelites have that they should go out of Egypt? I have a great thing dependent on this Exodus. For at the end of 3 months from the Exodus from Egypt, they are destined to receive the Torah on this mountain. We're standing on the same mountain. So therefore, God was not saying, oh, they're going to come in this mountain and do a mitzvah. They're going to come in the mountain and do 613 mitzvahs. So God says, listen, 3 months later, I'm going to get. So why couldn't you wait 3 months later? So we know that God already said 3 months later, they're going to come. So what's the problem? So what's the problem?
In for a penny, in for a pound. First, show me a couple mitzvahs before I give you more. In for a penny, in for a pound.
Okay, you can go that way. So we know. So with the first mitzvah is you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and there should be a sign, a covenant between you. Okay, so that is I can understand the mitzvah.
Wouldn't there be two? It was circumcised.
It's a good question. Good question.
Okay. 3 days.
Good question.
before you eat.
Okay.
And only Abraham was healed quickly because
That's right. That's why. First of all, they must have all healed quickly, and but that's what you understand. You understand why the Torah says later that when the Jewish people were journeying, they said it's too much. 3 days of journey after the circumcision. But so we know the famous statement. We say this in davening every day, and davening 3 times a day. Before the Kaddish, the Rabbanim, we say the Rabbanim ben Akash. Rabbanim ben Akash said the Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu Lazakisol. The Eibishter wanted to bring merit to the Jewish people. The Ficha Chibulem Torah mitzvahs. That's why He gave them many commandments. Sheneman Hashem Chafetz L'man Tzidkei. God, for the sake of His righteousness, to make the Torah great and glorious. So, not 1, not 2. Not 3, not 10, not 20, not 30, not 100, not 200, not 600, 613. So if the Eibishter wanted to give a schus to the Jewish people going out of Egypt, why did he give them 10? Why did he give them 20? One mitzvah? 2 mitzvahs, 1 mitzvah, the circumcision, 1 mitzvah. Why? What is the message? Really, that Rebbe wants to know what's the message. And you're going to come out with a phenomenal message, people. What's the message? No, I can't. I got to stretch it out. Relax. Relax. The Rebbe says, I mentioned today in the Chitas of the day, that the Alter Rebbe says, and then the Alter Rebbe says that everything has within it two things in the way the Eibush created a human being itself. He has the concept of love and fear within him. The positive and the negative. In any relationship, there's the positive and there's the negative. We have to care about two things in a relationship. That first of all, that we want to have this relationship, that we want to do things for each other, and we don't want to do things that are negative in this relationship. Right? We don't want to bring in outside things. We don't want to bring in things that are going to be negative. So if we have a positive and negative relationship, it's a meshugana relationship, a love and hate relationship. And a lot of relationships are that way. It's volatile. They love each other and they hate each other. No, we need to make sure we love each other, and we need to make sure that we don't hate each other. We work on both of those things, okay? We need to work on both of those aspects of the relationship, that we love each other in a positive way, we do things for each other, we are nice to each other, and we make sure that we don't do any negative things to each other. And that's the way the Eibush created the world, that it has these two things even in our psyche. We have Ava and we have Yira. We have love and we have fear. The truth is, Chassidus says, as we learned in Tanya today, that everything comes from love. That's the truth. Everything, both of these entities come from love. Both of these entities, both of these concepts come because I love you, I don't want to hurt you. So I love you, I don't want to have a separation from you. I don't want to have a breakage because I love you. Right? So everything comes from this Avas Hashem, from love of God. So now let's go to this content of Mitzrayim. This aspect of Mitzrayim, in essence, brought about a dual negative in this relationship between the Jews and God. It brought about a lack of positive, and it brought about a concept of negative. Because when you have a vacuum, when you have an empty space, there's no such thing as a vacuum. There's something else going to come into this situation. The Jewish people had two concepts. They didn't have a positive and they had a negative. The Eibush wanted to fix the positive and the negative. So the Zohar says as follows, it's text number 5a. The Jewish people came spiritually contaminated in Egypt. They sank into deep levels of impurity until they descended into 49 levels of impurity. God took them out of all bondage, and that's Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim is not only that there was a connection between God and the Jewish people. Yetzias Mitzrayim is God took us out of bondage. He took us out of impurities. He gave us the capability to go out of impurities, which that's what we do every single day. So Avram Azulai, look at he explains it. He lived in the 1500s. He says our sages have a tradition that the Jewish people were so contaminated with the profanity of Egypt that by the time the eve of Pesach arrived, they had entered into the 49 chambers of impurity. Had they crossed over to the 50th, they would have passed into no return. This is the deeper meaning of the words in the Haggadah. Had God not taken our forefathers out of Egypt, we and our children and our grandchildren would have been slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt forever. We would have not been actual physical slaves to Pharaoh. We would have been slaves to our impurities forever. This is why the Exodus of Egypt is mentioned in the Torah 50 times. I never knew that. I learned something new today, that it's mentioned in the Torah 50 times. Anybody knew that? Oh, so we'll learn something new today. It's mentioned in the Torah 50 times because it's not only that we suddenly became a nation. It's important that we became a nation and got out of impurities. We had the capability for not ever to be in an impure state, 50 levels. And again, this is a Kabbalistic concept of 50 levels of impurity. I cannot tell you the 49 to the 50, but that's I don't know. I do not know. It's above my pay grade. But it says there's 59 levels. There's 50 levels of impurity. 49 levels. Really, 49 levels because the 50th level is, and so too is the opposite. It says 50 levels to wisdom. So to say everything has its opposite. There's 50 levels to wisdom. And Moshe Rabbeinu reached to the 50th level of wisdom. Now, what level am I on? Or every one of us, I don't know.
There a test?
I don't know. I hope there's not a test. So it will not be proven. Right. So when the Jewish people, the Medrash says in text number 6, when the Jewish people were about to leave Egypt, the prosecuting angel stood up and claimed to the universe, at this point, these people are also idolaters. So why would you split the sea for them? So even after going out of Egypt, the angel above said, why are you doing anything for these guys? What's going to be in the future? You're in 50 days. But right now, they're nothing. They're a bunch of Egyptians. What are you making the difference between them and the Egyptians? So we should realize that Yetzias Mitzrayim was, again, two things. That we were making a relationship with God. But to make a relation to God, how do you make a relation with God? If you're in 49 levels of impurity, when you're so impure and poor person, when you're such levels of impurity. What did the Abish to do? That was the plan. So in essence, the plan was Amasim Bechorish, this is Amasim Bechorish teaching, that God, and Ev said, I'm gonna give you two mitzvahs. I'm going to give you the mitzvah of Milah, which is the positive mitzvah. And then I'm going to give you a mitzvah that's going to take you out of impurities. And that was the Korban Pesach. Now you have to imagine, I want you to have this imagination. The Jewish people are in 49 levels of purity, like Egyptians. One of the major deities in Egypt was the Seh, was the sheep. That was a god to them, right? And God says to the Jews, God to them, which ultimately infiltrated the Jewish nation, that it became to them an important entity, the Sheh. It became to them almost a god to them. That means impurities. It became to them, they were infiltrated by this psychological concept that the Seh is a god. Or an animal is a god. We know that. We know that it affected them even in the future. They made a golden calf. So I don't know. Go figure it out. So they had this concept that an animal is a god. You have to show it holiness. And even the Jews felt that way. And we know that the Jewish people worshiped. It was a struggle for them for many, many years. The Abish tells them, I want you to do one thing, right? I want you to go on the 10th day of the month, take a seh, take a sheep, and bring it to your house, because in 4 days, you're going to slaughter it. Every family is going to slaughter this seh. Desecrating the God of Egypt. I want you to do this mitzvah. And I want you to do it in Egypt. I don't want you to go we're going to work our way to leave Egypt. I want you to do it in Egypt. I want you to do it the place where you're influenced, where you were influenced by. I want you. You know what kind of trauma this was for them, for the Jews, right? Because they believed in it. This was a something that if you think about it and you imagine what it means to the Jews to do something. I don't know what if you can bring in something in when we live in today's age, to take something that we think is like, oh, this is we're part of the society, we live with them, and to do something.
Rabbi Bucket, I have a question. Did the Erev Rav also do this? Did they have to circumcise?
Yes, they did. Yes,
They did.
Yes.
The Erev Rav did. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
they did.
All right.
So it's truly, if you want to imagine it, if you want to conjure in your mind what this means to the Jewish people, to take a Seh, which was the deity in Mitzrayim, as we know, even the Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Pharaoh, if we're going to slaughter here, the Egyptians will stone us. This was not a simple thing. And this, what the Eibishter asked for the Jewish people to do, that was almost like Mesiras Nefesh. This was like a self-sacrifice act on their part to do this act. Yeah.
Well, I thought that the animals all died in the plague against the
Not the Jews, not the Jews.
Second question is one Erev
Erev means the multitude. There was a multitude of Egyptians that stuck to the Jews. Right. But Moshe said, it's improper, right? The Pharaoh, even the Pharaoh said, you know what, bring the sacrifice here, right? So Moses says, it's improper to do that, for we will sacrifice Ta'eva of Egypt to God our Lord. We'll sacrifice the deity of Egyptians before their eyes. They will stone us. Suddenly now, what Moshe Rabbeinu told the Pharaoh, God says the Jews should do. Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Pharaoh, how are we going to bring a sacrifice here? And then God says, I want you to bring a sacrifice here. Even the Pharaoh understood. How can you bring a sacrifice in Egypt? How can you do that? It's impossible to do that. They'll kill you. And then God says, my friends, I want every Jew, not one Jew. I don't want Moses to go and sacrifice or Aaron. I want every single family to take a sheep. And every Jew needs to be counted on this sheep, right? Every family needs to be counted. You cannot separate from the sheep. Every Jew needs to be counted on the sheep. Every family member, they need to be counted on the sheep. And you're going to sacrifice this sheep in Egypt. You're going to do it. Let's see if you can do it. Challenge. It was the ultimate challenge. The Te'eva, so the Rashi again, section 7b, Rashi is the Te'eva of Egypt, the deity of Egyptians, and for Milcom, the abomination of children of Ammon, but for the Jews, calls it an abomination, as per conversation translated into the word Te'eva. So what did the Eibishter want? The Eibishter God wanted that was something a deity should become an abomination by a Jew. Idol worship should become an abomination by a Jew, as it is a deity to a goy. As it is by him so special, by you it should be an abomination. Again, if you want to talk about the Jews after Matan Torah as they journey, I can understand that. You want to talk about the Jewish nation as they were in Egypt. For them, this was a monumental task to do. That's what Rashi says. The Jewish people were passionately, look at what Rashi says. The Jewish people in Egypt were passionately fond of idolatry. Again, it's hard for us to understand what that means. Because we Baruch Hashem, don't have a fond to idolatry. The Jewish people were passionately fond of idolatry. And we know that because that's what they did they struggled with that not only at the time of Moses, they struggled with it in the time of the first temple. It was a great struggle. Idolatry.
Do we know what it did for them, what they got out of it?
Don't know. They had a taiva. It was a taiva. It was a taiva. As a famous Gemara, the Gemara says that there was a great sage, Rabbi Yanai, because it says Menashe, Hilam Tzelem Be'echa. King Menashe, who lived in the time of the first temple, brought idolatry into the Beis Hamikdash. And there was a great sage later on, a Tana, 100 years later, who spoke against Menashe to his students. And the Gemara says a story that Menashe came to him in a dream. And he asked him a question in Jewish law. And the Tana didn't know the answer. He had this dream. He didn't know the answer. And Menashe says, see how you compare yourself. I'm a greater sage than you. And then he continued. He said, if you don't realize the taiva that we had for idolatry. It was an insane desire for idolatry. And he said, if you would have been nowadays, you would have picked your pants up and you would run to do idolatry. The Gemara says the sages got together and fasted for 40 days that Jews should lose the taiva for idolatry, lose the desire for idolatry. And Baruch Hashem, we have lost this desire. So Jews were passionately fond of idolatry. Passionately, Rashi. Moses said to them, how do you get rid of idolatry? They all had their little, we know that the Medrash says that there was one tribe who didn't give up their idols. As they traveled through the desert, the tribe of Dan didn't give up their little idols. And Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, in Mitzrayim, he tells them, Mishchu, withdraw, you got to take away your idols. You got to Mishchu. You got to first, if you really want to do this, I understand it's hard, you got to. That's why according to the Rambam, the sacrifices in the Beis Hamikdash was that concept. The Eivishter wanted to break this idolatry for the animals, shecht animals. Withdraw and take for yourself. In other words, withdraw from idolatry and take yourself a sheep for the mitzvah. The only way was chas v'sholom. Imagine if the Jews would say, you know what? We'll bring the sheep, but we'll bring it for the sake of an idol. No, you got to withdraw from this concept and take the sheep for the mitzvah. I want you to take the sheep. Don't take it for any other reason. And the only way you can do that is by separating yourself from idolatry. You got to get this idolatry out of your system. Yeah. So therefore, Moshe Alshet says, beautiful text in text number 8. It was necessary for God to give the Jewish people 2 mitzvahs. For as is well known, the Jewish people worship the Lamb. For an idolater to achieve redemption, 2 things are required: to remove the filth of impurity, and thereby to be induced into the hall of holiness. What? Inducted in the hall of holiness. Similar to twin notions of asay tov, do good, and sur merah, turn away from evil. Right? We say it in Adab, sur merah, it's a verse from Psalm, sur merah v'asay tov. Go away from evil and do good. The impurity of idolatry was removed through the blood of the Paschal Lamb. Name is slaughtering the Egyptian deity. This is alluded to the verse, withdraw and take for yourself. Withdraw from the idolatry and take yourself a lamb for the mitzvah. But this
Rabbi Booker, Did you just say that in the Beis Hamikdash, when they gave sacrifices, it was part of that was so that they wouldn't engage in idolatry with animals?
Says
Did
the
you just say
Rambam
that?
says that that's why not in Beis Hamikdash, but in the Mishkan. Right away in the Mishkan, that's why right in the Mishkan. What happened? The Jewish people made the golden calf, and right after the golden calf, God said, "Build a Mishkan." And what are you going to do in the Mishkan? You're going to bring sacrifices. What's going to be the sacrifice? The same thing you brought the golden calf. You're going to sacrifice. So that's going to get you out of idolatry. So you saw the Jewish people, even after giving the Torah, fell back into idolatry, fell back into bowing down to a golden calf. So the Eibishter that's the Rambam writes. The Eibishter right away gave them the mitzvah of having a Mishkan. And what was the major part of the Mishkan, especially for the Jewish people, because the rest of the Mishkan was not part of the service of the Jewish people, it was the service of the Kehanim. But what was the service of the Jewish people was sacrifice. They brought sacrifices, whether it was for sins, whether it was for shlamim. They brought animals, bulls and calves and goats, etc. So it was to get them, the Rambam writes, it was to break their taiva in idolatry, in the animal, and to worship an animal, and to shecht it, to take the animal and realize that the animal is a creation by God, and it's not a God, and it's there to serve God, and the way it serves God is through a sacrifice.
And that was not the same in the Beis Hamikdash? There wasn't a connection of doing it for that reason?
Ultimately, it is a connection, but I think because the Beis Hamikdash was still idolatry. We know in the first temple, for sure, there was still the struggle of idolatry. It didn't change. That's why there are some commentators who hold, Cook holds that Mashiach comes, that he was the chief rabbi of Israel. He holds, and some hold with him that when Mashiach comes, we won't do sacrifices. The Beis Hamikdash. Most rabbis disagree with him, but he holds that. He holds the Beis Hamikdash will be a vegetarian. It'll be. He holds actually that when Mashiach comes, we'll all become back vegetarian. So he holds. But whatever, most rabbis, most commentators don't agree with that, etc. Because most hold that it's not because of idolatry. And the truth is, the Ramban argues with the Rambam right away. He says, "What do you mean? Avram Avinu brought sacrifice. Yitzchak Avinu brought sacrifice, etc., etc." So and Adam and Isha brought a sacrifice. It says the Megillah says, the Medrash says the Adam and Isha brought a sacrifice. So what was his idolatry? So it's not. It has nothing to do. Sacrifice has to do with the concept of the Kiruv Hashem, etc., etc. Taking all the aspects of the world and bringing it up as a connection to God. Okay, but we're not going into that argument. It's a separate argument.
But God enjoys the smell.
Right.
And it brings pleasure to God.
Correct. Yeah. By a sacrifice, that's what it says. You don't find by any other mitzvah that it says nachas ruch. That's okay. That's a different subject. But for surely we know for the Jews in Egypt, this was a major problem. The Jews in Egypt, this was a major problem. So this is not enough. After impurity was removed, this people still needed to be inducted into God's service, namely to be a sign, a seal within the Holy One of God's service. This is then the purpose of the second blood, the circumcision. So that's the two concepts. The concept of the sacrifice of the Paschal lamb was to push it to break the concept of the service to deities. The concept of circumcision was a positive mitzvah. Okay. We answered the question. Why these two mitzvahs? What is the lesson to us?
You didn't get this.
He did. I defended it all. That's what the Alshul says. The circumcision is the positive commandment.
Oh.
Cool. The concept of the positive. This is a lesson to us. And this is the beautiful thing that Rebbe wants to bring out. Because the question still bothers the Rebbe. The Rebbe is still bothered by his original question. That Still, God could have taken the Jews out of Mitzrayim if he wanted to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. Why did the Eibishter still need this concept? Because we know that even taking the Jews out of Mitzrayim and they doing these two mitzvahs didn't. He still needed to give them the Torah. He still needed to give them the 613 commandments 50 days later. So why Taka did the Eibishter want that they should do one mitzvah, two mitzvahs? What is the real lesson to us that God, in essence, before going out of Mitzrayim, he wants a Jew to do one mitzvah? What is truly the lesson to us? The power of one mitzvah. And that's really what the Rebbe says. The Eibishter wanted to show Yidden the power of one mitzvah. The power of a mitzvah. We shouldn't think that it's that one mitzvah or one mitzvah I do or two mitzvahs I do is nothing. Either I do 613 mitzvahs or I do nothing. The Eibishter showed the Yidden in Mitzrayim that what one mitzvah can accomplish. They were naked before one mitzvah, and they became clothed with one mitzvah. In essence, the Rebbe wanted that every Jew should at least do one mitzvah in their lifetime. One mitzvah. Meet a Jew. No, it is enough. That's what it teaches us. It's not enough. You do 613. But you need to get a Jew to do one mitzvah. If you meet a Jew on the street, you need to get him to do one mitzvah. Even if it's one mitzvah. Get him to do one mitzvah. And that's really the lesson. That's really what the Parsha wants to tell us. Jews were in 49 levels of impurity. What is one mitzvah to 49 levels of impurity? How are you going to fix 49 levels of impurity with one mitzvah? With taking a sheep, you're going to fix 49 levels of impurity by doing one mitzvah. When you're 49 levels of impurity, like when you're up to 49 levels of holiness and you want to get over it, one mitzvah. But 49 levels of impurity, you're almost by the 50th level of impurity, and one mitzvah is going to change everything? Yes. The power of one mitzvah, even in Egypt, even in 49 levels of impurity, is unimaginable, I don't know what the right word to use. Unbelievable mitzvah.
Those are two powerful mitzvahs. They could understand it.
And a Jew that has not done anything, and you go tell him, come do one mitzvah, to him it's also an unbelievable thing. Mitzvah. You never put on tefillin, put on tefillin. Oh, but I'm not going to put on tefillin tomorrow. So what? Come and do a mitzvah. Any mitzvah that you can introduce to Yid, to light Shabbos candles, to put on tefillin, to make a bracha, to say thank you, Hashem. Any mitzvah you can think of, you meet a Jew and ask him to do a mitzvah, you should not diminish the power of that mitzvah. That can be the mitzvah that can either keep him in Mitzrayim or get him out of Mitzrayim. So look how the Rebbe explains it. Yezekah texts him in 9a. God said to Moses, I'll bring one more plague on a Pharaoh in Egypt. Afterwards, I'll let you go from here. When he lets you out, he will completely drive you out of there. Speak to the Jewish people's ears and let them borrow each man from his friend and each woman from his friend silver vessels and gold vessels. It's an interesting concept that God is now worried about. He's worried about, are Jewish people going to go out with money or not? So God gave the people favor in the Egyptian eyes. Also, Moses was highly esteemed in the land of Egypt, in the Pharaoh's and the people's eyes. So Rashi, the Gemara.
go to the golden calf.
That was Moshe Rabbeinu's complaint later. Moshe Rabbeinu said, right, correct. Correct. So look at the text. The Talmud says, text number 9b. Please speak to the ears of people, that the students of the school of Rabbi Yanai said, please, in an expression of supplication, God said to Moses, I beseech you, go and tell the people, I beseech you, borrow vessels and silver vessels of gold for the Egyptians. I'm begging you. This for me. Imagine the Jewish people leaving Egypt and worry about how much gold we're going to have. Just why? And God's worried about one thing. He's worried about Abraham. God says, the Egyptians are righteous because so that the righteous person, Abraham, will not say God fulfilled his pronouncement and they will see slaves and afflicted. But God did not fulfill his pronouncement, and afterwards they left with great possessions. Jewish people said to Moshe, if only we could get out ourselves, forget about the money. It's analogous to one who was incarcerated in a prison, and the people would say to him, we promise we will release you tomorrow and give you much money. And he says to them, I beseech you, release me today. I'm asking for nothing. So why should I leave tomorrow and have money? Let me out today. What is the meaning of that statement? What is the meaning that God says that I'm going to let you out of Mitzrayim? I want you to go out with great wealth. Let's get out today and we won't go out with great wealth. And the Jewish people said, we'll release you the promise. Release. You're released to the promise. Let's get out today. Correct, too. Could have got a gold mine right in front of them. God could shower down from heaven gold and silver. So what is the meaning of this verse? What is the meaning of this? So Chassidus says, it's not about gold and silver. The Rebbe says, based on Chassidus, text number 10a, the purpose of the exile of Egypt was the Jewish people could sublimate, and thereafter take with them the holy sparks of energy that was buried in Egypt. There's a deeper significance in the fact that the Jewish people cleaned out Egypt like a silo without grain and like a fishing net without fish. The Jewish people transformed the holy sparks that has been buried in Egypt. Amen. That's what the God said. They're not going to just be in slavery in Egypt and bingo. They'll leave with money. That's 210 years of slavery. How much money could you give them to suffice 210 years of slavery? Money. The Jewish people went as if for a purpose. There had to be a purpose in them going out in them being in Egypt. There had to be a spiritual purpose. And God says, don't worry. They're going to empty out Egypt of its spiritual goodness. God says Jewish people are in exile in Egypt, the worst country that could be, especially at that time. The Jewish people were in the worst country in the world, the roughest neighborhood in the world. So what? Why would they do? Because they're going to get money. That's what they will give them money. So it's worth it for a Jew to be 210 years in exile because they're going to go out with money. No. The promise was the Jewish people are there in exile for a purpose, for a godly purpose. They're going to come out as a nation. They're going to come out as a holier than they went in. Go 49 steps back to ultimately receive the Torah, to have a revelation that they never had before in history. Not Abraham, not Isaac, not Jacob, not anybody. That's what the power of the mitzvah is. Jews doing an exile here today. What are we doing here? To go out to Jew and tell, what are you doing here? For what? What are Jews doing here? They should do a mitzvah, do one mitzvah. Do one good deed, do one godly good deed. It's not, what's the whole purpose? Imagine a Jew goes through Gullus. Imagine Rabbi say sometimes he said he would cry. Imagine a Jew goes through Gullus for no reason. He goes to exile and he dies. He passed away after 120. He didn't do one mitzvah in his existence. So what was the whole purpose of him coming to exile? That's what Abraham was worried about. What's the purpose? You're putting them into exile. What's going to be the purpose? And God says, I promise you, don't worry. They're going to empty out Egypt of all its holiness. They're going to elevate Egypt. They're going to elevate themselves. So the same is true that Rebbe says regarding to the future redemption, which is a verse of Malachi states, is supposed to mirror the experience of the exile. We have to do something. We're in Gullus. We're in exile. We're getting influenced by the world. We're getting influenced by the surroundings. Why? Why would God put us in Gullus? If not that we would do a mitzvah, would elevate our surroundings, would bring up some godliness in our surroundings. The Rebbe says that's what?
And we know what for.
Okay. So that's why the Rebbe continues and says, that's why the sage is mentioned, this sage, Rab Masya ben Charish. The Rebbe brings on a Gemara in Talmud. This is interesting because I was actually in Rome this past summer.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that I went to the history tour, and it's fascinating because the Jews were in Rome even before the Churban Beis Hamikdash, even before the first destruction of the first temple. The Jews were already in Rome. Yeah, according to the history. It's interesting that there was already a Jewish population in Rome.
Why?
Before, I don't know. Maybe there were influences, maybe there was business. Jews were already in Rome. Sages taught, look at the Gemara in text number 11a. Sages taught, verse states, justice you shall follow. The Gemara says, this teaches us that one should follow the sage to the academy where they are found. For example, follow Rabbi Lezer to Lud, after Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai to Be'er Chel, after Rabbi Shua to Pekin, after Rabbi Gamliel to Yavna, after Rabbi Kiva to Bnei Brak, after Rabbi Masya to Rome. Rabbi Masya went to Rome. He went to Rome. He left Eretz Yisrael. After Rabbi Chanina ben Taid to Sichdi, after Yosef to Sifri, after Rabbi Yehuda ben Bestated to Nitzivim, after Yeshua to exile in Babylon, he went to Bavel. After Rabbi Yehuda the prince to Beit Sharin, and after the sages in the time of the temple to the chambers of the Hunstone. That's where the chamber of Hunstone was the Sanhedrin was. It was called the chambers of the Hunstone, because the Sanhedrin stood on stones. It was a beautiful chamber that was chamber of stones. It was like the Supreme Court. The Jewish people. It seems, so that's what Meir Cohen of Rottenburg said, that the Supreme Court, that seems that the Supreme Court was in Rome. At the time, Manasseh was a great, he built, the Rebbe writes, Masya ben Charish consistently, why did he go to Rome? Why did the sage go to Rome, out of all places? Because Jews were living in Rome. Because Jews were living in Rome. Because Jews were living in Rome. Amasya lived the time of after the second Beis Hamikdash. Lived 100 years after the second Beis Hamikdash. Amasya Mecharish would consistently comfort his students about the fact that they lived in Rome. He would tell them that the future redemption depend on them being in Rome, in Roman environment, and to establish yeshiva within that environment. In other words, the task to find a Jew who was stuck in a Roman situation, meaning he or she was beer from mitzvahs, and to render them no longer Romans, rather yeshiva students. This even a master Mechoresh yeshiva was specifically in Rome, in the hotbed of exile, as to reach out to the Roman Jew and thereby bring redemption. That's what the Rebbe said. You have to turn Boca into a holy place. That's what you're doing in Boca. If all that it was necessary was to us to leave exile, look at the Rebbe continues 12b. If all that was necessary was us to leave exile, we would have long ago been absolved of this bitter exile. If that's what it's all about, we should have been out of here already. God wishes more for more. He's not happy, God. He doesn't want us to leave exile. He wants us to empty out the exile. God wishes for more, namely that the redemption of every Jew from exile should be in a manner of beer, shouldn't be in a manner of beer and naked. God wishes that we should have mitzvahs. So we should seek out Jews who are currently holding in a situation of beer and naked and gift them with 1 or 2 mitzvahs. You see what the Rebbe writes? Or even more self-understood. But 1 or 2 mitzvahs. You meet a Jew, get them to do a mitzvah.
Blessing over what they're reading.
Whatever. Get them to do a mitzvah. Not a single Jew will be left behind when the future Gentile finally arrives. As such, it's imperative that we seek out every single Jewish person, wherever they may be, and ensure that they are in possession of at least 1 mitzvah. They are in beer. After all, the redemption of the entire Jewish nation dependent on it. Go out, there's thousands of Jews here in Boca that have maybe not done a mitzvah in their life. Trust me, there are many. There are many. And let us go out, and this is what the Parsha teaches us, that 1 mitzvah, not 613, not thousands, 1 mitzvah. Jews that were on the 49 levels of impurity, and 1 mitzvah brought about the redemption of the Jewish nation.
But wait one
Do
second,
this.
Rabbi Booker.
We
How
will
is it
merit,
possible?
let me finish it off. We'll merit to the future redemption speedily in our day. That's the lesson that the Rebbe learns for the Parsha. Yes, my dear.
So how is it possible? I mean, people are, maybe they're kind, maybe they,